I was 14 years old, and it was an average night around 9 p.m. I was babysitting my little cousin at his house while my mom and aunt were out shopping. My dad and uncle were at the movie theater. My cousin, who was about 7 at the time, was playing with his toys in the living room while I was half watching TV. It was the first time I was at home alone at night with a kid, and I felt uneasy. It was a strange sensation that I couldn't quite identify, and it made me anxious. I tried to shake it off, thinking it was just nerves from being responsible for a young child. After a while, I decided to get up and walk to the back door to check the locks. I wanted to ensure everything was secure since it was dark outside. After confirming that the door was locked, I walked back through the kitchen. That's when I saw what was causing my unease. In the window, there was a man, disheveled and unkempt, with unshaven facial hair and clothes that looked old and torn. He was just standing there, staring in at my cousin. My heart raced as a sense of protectiveness kicked in. I pretended like I hadn't seen him and turned back to my cousin, trying to keep my voice calm. "Hey, buddy, let's go upstairs. Our parents will be home soon, and they don't want you staying up too late." I led him up the stairs and tucked him into bed, all while knowing there was a man outside watching us. At the time, I was about 125 pounds and 5'8", and I played football at school. I felt like I could handle myself if it came down to it. After putting my cousin to bed, I headed downstairs with a sense of urgency. I walked into the kitchen and grabbed a meat tenderizer, a heavy hammer-like tool I hoped would serve as a weapon if needed. As I turned back to the window, my heart sank. He was gone. I sprinted to the front door and checked the locks. Both the deadbolt and the knob were secure. I felt a slight wave of relief, but it was short-lived. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still nearby. I ran back upstairs and went into my cousin's room, shutting the door behind me. I sat down in front of it, blocking it with my body. My cousin, seeing my serious expression, asked, "What are you doing?" I told him not to worry and that he should keep his head low and stay quiet. I quickly grabbed my phone and dialed 911. The operator answered, and I explained the situation, my voice shaking. They assured me that officers would be dispatched immediately. However, they informed me it would take about 30 minutes for them to arrive. After that, I called my dad and uncle, but I knew they were at least 45 minutes away. I hung up and sat in silence, gripping the meat tenderizer tightly. I didn't want to scare my cousin, but I felt a deep fear creeping in. Then I heard it. A loud crash, followed by the unmistakable sound of glass shattering. My heart dropped as I realized the man had broken a window. I could hear heavy boots walking around on the main floor. I leaned closer to my cousin and whispered, "Stay calm, hide under the covers, and keep quiet." I could hear the man moving around downstairs, and it was horrifying. Every creak of the floorboards seemed amplified in the stillness of the house. I couldn't believe this was happening. I was responsible for my cousin, and I felt completely powerless. I glanced at the clock. About 5 minutes passed since I had heard the glass shatter, and the footsteps continued moving around the house. Then I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps coming up the stairs. At that moment, I was terrified. My cousin's bedroom door was no more than 10 feet from the stairs. The footsteps stopped right outside the door, and I held my breath, gripping the meat tenderizer tightly, ready to defend us. I heard the man start to open the doors in the hallway. First my aunt and uncle's room, then the bathroom. My mind raced as I thought about what I would do if he opened the door to my cousin's room. I felt completely exposed, sitting there with nothing but a kitchen tool to protect us. After 15 minutes of hearing the man moving around, I finally heard him go back downstairs. I listened intently as he opened the door to the basement. I couldn't believe it. I was in a state of shock and fear. It felt like forever before I heard the sound of sirens approaching in the distance. Finally, 15 minutes later, the police arrived, bursting into the house with flashlights and drawn weapons. They shouted for anyone inside to come out, but I stayed silent, still clutching the meat tenderizer. I could hear them moving through the house, checking each room thoroughly. Eventually, they found me and my cousin huddled together in his room. The officers quickly reassured us that everything was fine now. They explained that the man who had broken into the house had escaped from a mental hospital located 1 province away. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding, feeling both relief and disbelief wash over me. The officers continued to check the house for any signs of the man, while one of them comforted us. They assured us that they had a few patrols out looking for him, and that we would be safe. My dad and uncle arrived shortly after, looking frantic. I could see the worry in their eyes as they rushed to us. I explained everything that had happened, and they listened carefully, looking relieved but still concerned. The officers filled them in on the situation, assuring them that the man was being apprehended. I felt a sense of safety return as I realized I was no longer alone. I would never forget that night or the fear I felt while protecting my cousin. It was a terrifying experience that taught me the importance of being vigilant, especially when you are home alone at night. Before we move on to the next story, if you're still here, make sure to subscribe and let me know where you're tuning in from in the comments for more true stories. Thanks. The night before Valentine's Day in 2023 turned out to be one of the most harrowing nights of my life, and it had nothing to do with ghosts or supernatural forces. It was a chilling experience rooted in tragic reality. My parents had decided to take their first vacation alone since my brother and I were born, leaving me to dog sit our family German Shepherd in our home. They planned to be away for 8 days, and for the first few nights, everything went smoothly. But on the third night after their departure, everything changed. I had set up camp on the living room couch, as my old bedroom had been converted into a home office for my dad's remote work. My loyal dog, Duke, a massive German Shepherd with a gentle demeanor, lay peacefully at my feet, offering some comfort in the stillness of the night. As the clock struck a little past 3 a.m., I drifted into a deep sleep, completely unaware of the chaos brewing outside. Suddenly, I was jolted awake by a deafening noise, a loud bang that echoed through the house. Duke sprang up, barking uncontrollably, his deep growls piercing the silence. My heart raced as I tried to make sense of the disruption. Was it thunder? A car backfiring? Fear gripped me, but my instinct was to calm Duke. I started to sit up on the couch, ready to reassure him that everything was all right. But just as I was about to speak, a woman's terrified scream pierced the night. No, please no. The raw panic in her voice sent chills down my spine. Before I could react, another bang erupted, sharper and more intense than the first. Wood splinters rained down onto my face, landing in my eye as the wall behind me trembled. The realization hit me hard. Something horrific had just unfolded. In that fleeting moment, I understood the gravity of the situation. My neighbor had shot his daughter. Those splinters, they were fragments of the wall, splintered from the force of the bullet or her body hitting it. If I had sat up as I intended, I would have been inches away from potential danger. With a surge of adrenaline, I dialed 911, my fingers trembling as I pressed the numbers. The operator's calm voice helped ground me as I struggled to convey the chaos unfolding next door. After ensuring that all doors and windows were locked, I sat in silence, straining to hear what would happen next. A few minutes later, the unmistakable wail of police sirens filled the air, followed by the sounds of officers shouting commands and kicking down my neighbor's door. My heart raced as I watched from my window, anxiety coursing through me as they apprehended him and took him into custody. After what felt like an eternity, I finally ventured outside to speak with the officers still present. I recounted everything I had heard, my voice shaky but determined. I described the screams, the gunshots, and the splinters that had fallen from the wall, knowing how close I had come to something far worse. In the days that followed, I found myself drawn into a whirlwind of legal proceedings. I received a subpoena to testify against my neighbor, who claimed the shooting was an accident. But I knew the truth. I had heard that desperate scream before the second shot rang out, and there was no doubt in my mind that it wasn't a mistake. The thought of facing him in court filled me with dread. He lived right next door, and if he were acquitted, I knew he wouldn't hesitate to seek revenge. When the day of the trial arrived, I sat in the courtroom, the air thick with tension. I was nervous, but I understood the importance of my testimony. When it was my turn to take the stand, I felt a wave of anxiety wash over me. I steadied myself and spoke clearly, detailing the events of that night. I was determined to convey the horror I had witnessed, the reality of what had transpired just beyond the walls of my home. Thankfully, the district attorney was committed to ensuring justice was served. After several tense days in court, the verdict was delivered. My neighbor was found guilty of murder and sentenced to over 20 years in prison without the possibility of parole. A wave of relief flooded over me. The nightmare was finally over, and he would no longer pose a threat to anyone. Years later, the memory of that fateful night still lingers in my mind. I often think about how close I came to an entirely different outcome. My neighbor, now in his 70s, serves his sentence far away, while I have moved on with my life. Yet I'll never forget the sound of that scream or the splinters that fell into my eye. It was a night that altered everything. It was the middle of summer, and my parents had left for the weekend to go to our house in Cape Cod. It's about a 2-hour drive away, so it's no big deal for them to leave me alone for a few days. My mom had made some pasta for me to heat up to eat whenever, and I had some money if I wanted to order a pizza. Things were all good. The first night I was alone, I stayed up till 3 in the morning playing Xbox, so I woke up really late the next day. I checked my phone when I woke up and saw it was a little past 1. I had made plans to play some street hockey with my friends at 3, so I threw myself out of bed and stumbled into the shower. I take really long showers, so when my parents are gone, I go mental. I was in there for about 45 minutes, scrolling through Reddit and Twitter when I heard my front door open. The bathroom is directly up the stairs from the back door, and that thing is pretty loud when it opens and closes. I immediately froze since, obviously, I was supposed to be alone. I waited for about 2 minutes, ears trained to hear anything else. Nothing. I figured it was just the wind or maybe my parents had come home early, so I turned off the shower, wrapped a towel around myself, and slowly made my way down the stairs to check it out. The stairs leading to the kitchen, where the back door is, are narrow and walled in, making it feel like I was walking down a tighter version of a stairwell. This meant I couldn't see into the kitchen until I reached the bottom. Even though my house is old and the creaking stairs announced my every step, I took my time, trying to be as quiet as possible. It probably took me about 45 seconds to walk down all 12 stairs. When I reached the second to last step, just before I could see into the kitchen, I paused for a moment to gather my thoughts. Deep down, I knew I was being silly. There was no reason to think anything was in the kitchen. I hadn't heard any other noises, and if there had been burglars, they wouldn't have still been lingering in the kitchen. After mentally scolding myself for being such a wuss, I let out a nervous chuckle and confidently walked down the last 2 steps, turning the corner into the kitchen. Standing about 2 feet away from me in the middle of my kitchen is a man staring straight at me, perfectly still, with a massive smile across his face, just staring at me. The thing I remember most vividly wasn't his face or his smile, but his arms. They weren't just at his side. He held them in the strangest, most abnormal position I've ever seen. He had rotated them to the point where they were almost completely reversed, lifting them up and a little behind himself. I don't know why I remember this so much, but it was just the most demonic, abnormal position I'd ever encountered. Honest to God, I think I almost had a heart attack right there. Looking back, I can realize how creepy this situation was, but in the moment, I just took a step towards him and punched him as hard as I could in the jaw, sort of half slapping and pushing him towards the ground. The second I connected, I beelined up the stairs, dropping my towel in the kitchen, my heart racing out of control. I sprinted into my room and locked the door behind me. Without even thinking, I immediately called 911 and, nearly in tears, told the operator what happened. As I sat on the floor of my room, practically in the fetal position, staring at the door and praying that a cop would arrive soon, I noticed the light coming from the gap under my door had stopped. The fucker was standing outside my door. There are no words to describe the feeling I had. I was paralyzed with fear. watching the shadow across the bottom of the door shift in tiny ways. I stayed balled up, staring at the gap, praying the man would go away for what felt like an hour. All the while, the 911 operator was asking, "Hello? Sir, are you there? Hello?" I didn't want to make a noise, and even if I wanted to move my arms to bring the phone to my mouth, I don't think I could have. Eventually, the light returned to the gap, and I heard the faintest of footsteps slowly creaking the wooden floorboards as he walked down the hall. It was silent for minutes as I just sat there curled up, unable to even speak. I heard banging on the front door and the sound of two officers entering my house. I finally felt safe and opened the door to see the two of them standing there. I almost cried. Nowadays, my parents don't leave me home alone anymore, thank God, and I check every lock on the house before going to bed. I still get nightmares occasionally, and my heart starts racing whenever I see someone standing still. But I'm doing all right. Even working with sketch artists and a few lineups, the police never found whoever the hell was in my house. That sends shivers down my spine every time I look outside, half expecting to see him standing across the street, smiling under a lamppost. I have no idea what he wanted or who he was.